When we started our church in 2002, I was 31 years old. It's hard to imagine how much has happened since then, including, I'm sorry to say, I've gotten 20 years older. I'm well aware of the statistics about founding pastors and what happens with their churches if they don't think about the future. So a few years ago, we decided to make an intentional, deliberate investment in young leaders, the next generation of leadership in our church. And you can see them at every campus. This has not been an accident. And it's been a privilege, a great honor to pour into them and to help shape their leadership and to help them live into their giftedness. The future of our church is bright because of it. So today, I want to introduce to you somebody who has become a special part of our team. Ellis Hopson, I met him a few years ago. He was new to faith. He was curious about who Jesus is. He made a commitment to Jesus. And I learned that Ellis is a really, really exceptionally gifted writer. He's a good leader. He's crazy about Jesus, and he's a growing communicator. So we've been pouring into him in these gifted ways. And today, I'd like you to do something a little bit unusual. I'd like you to welcome with me for the very first time on the PCC teaching platform, Ellis Hopson.
I'm 28 years old and have never made a ton of money. So I lived with my parents until about a year and a half ago. And in total, I've lived in the Central Virginia area since 2001. So I have plenty of memories and stories from my parents' house, where they still live today, by the way. But this time of year, as temperatures rise and we finally start to emerge from a long winter, always reminds me of one story in particular. It was in the springtime several years ago, and it centers around the backyard, where there's a really nice deck and a patio, but just a few steps away from the patio, there were a bunch of tree roots under the surface of the ground. We started to notice as the temperatures rose that some visitors would gather on the ground where these roots were, visitors of the stinger-wielding variety, some of my least favorite. Hornets would come in bunches and crawl all over these roots and hang out. So after a few weeks or maybe a month of this happening, we decided that we had had enough. We wanted to roam freely in our yard, so these invaders had to go. So my parents, my younger brother, and I tried to find out why these roots were attracting the hornets. But despite our best efforts, we couldn't figure it out. Whatever was drawing them to these roots was below the surface, buried where we couldn't see the source of it. As I was thinking back to that story, I started to wonder where else in nature we can find something like this, where on the surface, everything appears fine. But just under the surface, something else entirely is lurking. So I ended up finding this, the Loesia rediviva. It's a small herb that's native to the northwestern part of the United States, especially in Washington and Oregon. You can see from looking at this picture that it's beautiful on the surface. But what we don't see here are the plant's roots, which are actually dangerous for the surrounding ground and the plant itself. And it's a plant that grows under very interesting and specific conditions. It grows best in environments where there are a lot of rocks present, because it's exceptionally good at moving other things out of the way to ensure that it has enough space. The second part of its genus species name, rediviva, means revived or reborn, referring to its unique ability to regenerate from roots that are seemingly dry and dead. And it needs perfect drainage to survive, because under an excess level of moisture, its main root can become rotted very easily. Oh, and the last part, the part that's really relevant for you and me, is that the more common name that the Loesia rediviva is referred to in our vernacular is the bitter root. Even if you've never visited the Northwest before, you have encountered the bitter root. Not the plant, but the emotion that's taken root within all of us at some point in time. Not the bitter root, but bitterness. That's what we're talking about today in the final week of our No Offense series, where we've been talking about how in a world that is so easily angry and offended, we can choose to live differently. During the first 2 weeks of this series, we talked about how we can make that choice in momentary actions that can happen in the blink of an eye, and how those small changes can help us establish good habits over time. Last week, when we talked about forgiveness, we discussed something that might take some of us a while to be able to do. And as we conclude this series, we're also going to talk about something that happens over time. Something that stews inside us until it takes days, weeks, months, even years to finally overcome. Bitterness. Bitterness is defined as anger and disappointment at being treated unfairly or resentment. But it's a lot more than that. Bitterness is a kind of darkness that grows slowly within us, and if it goes unchecked over time, it can completely consume us. It's a destroyer of our souls and our relationships, and it holds on to the past. While others move on, while the world around us moves on, we're still stuck. But it doesn't have to be that way. We have a solution rooted in the pages of the Bible, given to us by the writer of Hebrews when he said, "Make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many." The New Living Translation says it like this: "Watch out that no poisonous root of bitterness grows up to trouble you, corrupting many." We can't allow the root of bitterness to grow and expect beauty to sprout in our yards or in our hearts. And it's not enough to find a temporary fix. We have to kill bitterness at its roots. And in order to do that, let's go back to the definition of bitterness. This definition, well, by definition, tells us what bitterness is. But it also tells us about what bitterness is not. There's been a common theme in every week of this series: anger, and more specifically, what other secondary emotions it stirs up inside us. So I wouldn't blame you for thinking, aren't anger and bitterness basically the same thing? Well, we can find the difference between the two in the pages of the Bible, specifically in the book of Ephesians. There's a passage of scripture here that's easy to miss, but has a hidden clue about the difference between anger and bitterness. "In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold." The clue I'm talking about here is the word foothold. A foothold is a stepping stone, a place that brings you further, but not to a place where you're finished. A mile marker on your way to your eventual destination. In this case, bitterness. Every one of us encounters things that make us angry on a given day. Not having what I need or want in the fridge in the morning makes me angry, despite the fact that it's not there because I didn't go out and buy it. You know what else makes me angry? Y'all do. More specifically, how some of y'all drive. I'm a right lane kind of driver. That's my comfort zone. I just want to get on whatever the main road is, get in the right lane, and do my own thing. But I can't seem to have a moment's peace before somebody comes flying up behind me and rides inches from my bumper. And y'all, I don't know what your interpretation of the speed limit is, but I'm going the speed that's posted on the signs like 95% of the time. And wait, here's the best part. If you wanted to do that because you had nowhere else to go, fine, I guess. But this happens all the time when there's no one in the left lane. I've tried to find a logical explanation for why this happens, but I've come up with a whole lot of nothing so far. So, for the instigators of this infuriating experience, I have one thing to say: just go around. So, that makes me a little bit angry. As a planner, calendar, and spreadsheet kind of guy, not having a plan makes me angry. Feeling like I'm not being heard or not getting my point across well makes me angry. All of these things start out as anger. But if I give in to my feelings about things like that, day after day, week after week, month after month, eventually they'll mutate into something more. Maybe something more serious is the cause of your anger. How you were treated as a child. The broken and unhealthy family you grew up in. Being deserted by someone close to you. The betrayal of a former significant other or a close friend. All of these things can cause anger too. The kind of anger that spreads under the surface. This is the formula. Because if we carry unresolved anger with us over a period of time, it will become rooted inside us. It'll become bitterness. Which brings us to the first step of killing bitterness. Identify it. Sometimes we're unable to see the bitterness in ourselves. We write it off as a bad day or tell ourselves that we'll get over it. So the first step is to look within ourselves, examine the things that cause anger, and ask ourselves, have I been carrying this with me? For how long? Has it become bitterness? We can't kill what we can't see. So in order to deal with the bitterness in our hearts, we first have to identify that it's taken root. As we tried to deal with the root and hornet problem in our yard, well, we tried everything. We tried coating the roots with substances that would ward off the hornets, and they still came back. We tried to cover the roots up. We even went as far as to spray paint them to cover whatever substance was attracting these hornets. It didn't work. None of it worked. And it's the same with our bitterness. We can try to distract ourselves from it with things that we hope will draw our attention elsewhere. We can try to cover it up and pretend it's not there. We can try to disguise it as something else entirely. None of it will work. There was one thing that worked on the roots, though. One day we had the idea to dig the roots up in order to identify what about them was attracting the hornets. And we finally discovered the culprit, a sticky, sap-like substance that the hornets were crazy for. We couldn't discover what the source of the problem was until we dug into the ground and pulled the root out. And it's the same for us when it comes to our bitterness. Because in order to kill the root of bitterness, you have to expose it. This idea comes directly from Ephesians, where it says, "Take no part in the worthless deeds of evil and darkness. Instead, expose them." Identifying our bitterness is only one step to killing it. We have to expose the bitterness that's within us. Exposing the bitter root in the ground was relatively easy, but it's a little bit harder to do with the bitterness in ourselves. Up until this point, dealing with bitterness can be a personal, internal journey. You can look within yourself, by yourself, and identify bitterness. And let's be honest, it's easier that way, right? It's so much easier to put our heads down and try to muscle through it all by ourselves. Maybe because in our minds, it's easier than being open with people. Or maybe we're afraid of exposing them to the same hurt that we're carrying around. But exposing our bitterness necessarily requires making it visible, getting it out in the open and revealing its nature. And to do this means we have to expose ourselves. Whoa. Everybody keep your clothes on. That's not what I meant when I say expose ourselves. What I'm talking about is exposing ourselves verbally and emotionally. And let's be real. Who's actually comfortable doing that? Now I know our extrovert crowd here today is thinking, me, I'm comfortable doing that. Somebody like Pastor Brian comes to mind. He's so okay with sharing his life with us that at times it's a little unsettling. Like that thing he's got for Tony the Tiger he keeps bringing up. He's completely fine with sharing his bad habits, temptations, and failures with us almost every week. But most of us have a much harder time being open about our problems and challenges. Maybe you are at ease with meeting new people, with sharing your personality unashamedly, and with being the center of attention in a room. But exposing a darkness born of inner pain or shame, a root that's been anchoring itself within you for days, weeks, months, or years? No. Nobody, not one of us, is comfortable with that. But it's necessary if we're going to expose our bitterness and find an alternative to it. An alternative that Ephesians tells us. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. Instead, be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God through Christ has forgiven you. How can we have kindness, tenderness, and forgiveness in our hearts if they're already filled with bitterness? How can we get rid of bitterness so we can make room for these things instead? To accomplish this, we need people. We need people we can trust to expose our bitterness without fear of judgment or condemnation. People who will extend us kindness, tenderheartedness, and forgiveness as we go through this process. People who can accept us as the broken human beings we are, recognize that we're trying to leave our bitterness behind us, and help us kill it. So that one day, we'll have room in our hearts to extend the same things to those people and more. If you're able to do these first two steps, identifying and exposing your bitterness, you'll have made a lot of progress towards killing it. But our last step is a key component to breaking free from your bitterness, not just in the here and now, but also equipping yourself to do it in the future. When we finally dug up those bitter roots in the yard and discovered the substance that was attracting the hornets, we finally had found the source of the problem. But then came the question, now what? We knew from trial and error that there was next to nothing we could do to stop the hornets from coming. So we started to wonder what we could do to stop this hostile takeover so that we could roam freely. The idea that we settled on was to chop the roots into pieces, and in the process, stop the flow of the substance that the hornets were attracted to. We knew that wasn't a permanent solution, and sure enough, the hornets came back as soon as it warmed up the following year. But what it did accomplish was stopping the process from starting all over again, year after year. And this is what we have to do with our bitterness, too. We've established that bitterness manifests over time. But if we can do the first two steps we've talked about to deal with the bitterness that we carried in here today, then this final step can be the key to killing the bitterness we'll encounter in the future. We can kill the bitterness that's starting to take root in our hearts if we'll prevent it. Because the easiest time to kill bitterness is before bitterness is born. We hear this from Jesus himself. A farmer went out to plant his seed. As he scattered it across his field, some seed fell on a footpath where it was stepped on, and the birds ate it. Other seed fell among rocks. It began to grow, but the plant soon wilted and died for lack of moisture. Other seed fell among thorns that grew up with it and choked out the tender plants. Still other seed fell on fertile soil. This seed grew and produced a crop that was 100 times as much as had been planted. It's easy to read this passage as an explanation of how in the right environment and under the right conditions, good things can be produced. And that's true. But I want to look at the first part of this parable again. A farmer went out to plant his seed. As he scattered it across his field, some seed fell on a footpath where it was stepped on, and the birds ate it. Some of the seed the farmer plants is instantly eaten by birds, instantly halted in its development before it has a chance to grow. This isn't what we want for the seeds that can produce good things within us, but it is what we should want and can pursue when it comes to dealing with our bitterness. If we'll take action to address our anger and other emotions before we ever reach the point where we're bitter, then we'll have to combat the deep-seated, festering bitterness much less often. And we'll have equipped ourselves with the tools to do this. So how does this actually play out in our lives? A way to stop bitterness from taking root in its tracks. Some of you already know this, but I'm getting married this year. I got engaged last July to my fiance, Abby. Some of you guys know her too. Even though Abby and I have only known each other for a little while, she knows me incredibly well. At times, it's a little weird, if we're just being honest. Soon after we started dating, Abby looked at me one day and said, "Hey, wouldn't it be fun if we wore matching outfits at church on Sunday?" Sounding kind of silly to me, but I was obsessed with her, still am, and in a moment of divine preparation for my future role as Abby's husband, I said, "Yes, that sounds a great, amazing idea." If I'm being honest, though, it was fun. It was fun. Like this time, got the black t-shirts going on, and this time, all orange everything, okay, and this time, got the red, the jeans. It was fun. It was fun. We enjoyed being intentional about matching on Sundays. But then, it wasn't intentional. And it started happening all the time. Now we'll show up places wearing the same color shirt, same style pants, the exact same shoes, all without ever speaking about it. It's really weird and makes me wonder, where does this end? At this rate, by our wedding day, we'll be wearing the same color socks every day with zero coordination. Another time where I feel like Abby knows me a little too well is when I'm angry or upset about something. And I really try to hide when I'm angry. I don't like expressing my anger in any way, but it just doesn't seem to matter. Abby picks up on it immediately. And then, it's like a shark smelling blood. She'll immediately start asking questions. What's wrong? Why are you upset? What did I do? How can I help? And I'm like, oh, I didn't know we were playing 20 questions. In the heat of the moment, it's hard to see this. But the truth is that all she's trying to do is get me to deal with my feelings as soon as I feel them coming on. And maybe I finally arrived at the conclusion that it's unsettling because she's right. Abby knows, and deep down, I know, that the best way for me to not let my negative emotions mutate over time into bitterness is to deal with them at the first opportunity. If you're dealing with some internal anger, then you can start with asking yourself a simple question. Why am I upset about this? Allow yourself to feel the emotion you're experiencing and then try to explain it to yourself, maybe even out loud. This will help you process exactly how you're feeling. Then you can ask yourself another question. What am I going to do about this feeling? If there's nothing in your power you can or should do, then that's a sign you should probably let it go. Don't allow that to be rooted inside you longer than it has to. If it's a conflict or point of contention with another person, maybe that coworker or a boss, that kid at school, maybe even your spouse, the sooner you talk to that person about how you're feeling, the easier it will be to avoid becoming bitter. When you keep how you're feeling about something that happened with another person buried, your perception of the incident and the person will be warped by your feelings, and it'll be hard to separate between your feelings and the facts. Maybe the thing you're bitter about isn't an isolated incident. Maybe it happened long ago and it still torments you. Maybe there's not a person you can talk to face to resolve it. Maybe you've carried it with you for so long that you're convinced you'll never be free of it. Those are all things I've experienced before. You see, I'm not talking about bitterness today as someone who has developed the perfect strategy to kill it. I'm talking about bitterness as someone who's seen how vital it is to eradicate it from my life. I told you earlier that I'm engaged, but from my junior year of high school well into adulthood, I was in a committed relationship with another girl for over 7 years. When you date somebody for that long, you inevitably start to imagine what a life with that person would look like, which is what I did. I thought she was the one. But through a pattern of behavior and a couple of specific incidents, that relationship suffered a serious fracture. I didn't know it immediately, but in hindsight, my trust had been broken beyond repair. I did more than my fair share to help widen the chasm between us after that. But it was just when I thought it was salvageable, I found out suddenly and shockingly that she was leaving. I was hurt. I felt betrayed, and I was angry. But the worst part was that I told myself I was over it long before that was anywhere close to being true. And it affected the way that I interacted with others. There have been several relationships that I entered guarded or skeptical or just convinced that it would end in heartbreak. And it was all because of the anger I hadn't resolved from that breakup. Anger that took root inside me and became bitterness. And then I met Abby and we started dating, and I wish I could tell you that the new love I found with her was the remedy I needed for my bitterness. But it hasn't been that easy. Not even close. It didn't take much time at all for it to become obvious that I was carrying some baggage from my previous relationship into my current one. Lack of trust, warped perception, fear of betrayal, and anger at the prospect of it happening again are all things I've had to wrestle with. Not because of anything that's happened between Abby and me, but because of the bitterness I had built up from my past. Together, we identified my bitterness. We've exposed it, and we have been and will continue to work on how to prevent it in the future. It's been a difficult process, and it's not over. There still are and will be days where I don't get this right and allow bitterness to get the best of me. But I also know that by implementing the truths that we talked about today, truths that are rooted in the Bible, I can kill that bitterness, and I can continue to kill it. I know that some of you have faced worse, that you've suffered through more excruciating times and deeper, longer-lasting pain, that you've been the victim of manipulation, heartbreak, abuse. I don't know exactly what you've faced before or continue to face right now. I can't possibly understand exactly how you feel. All I can do is share my experience, what I've learned, and what I know to be true. So allow me to offer you some hope today. My story can be your story too. If you feel like you're completely consumed by bitterness like I was, know that there is a way forward. I couldn't see it before, but it was always there. And that's true for you too. I know that this feels impossible to overcome. This might just be the fight of your life. But no matter how dark it seems or how hopeless it feels, you can take the first step on that way forward. Maybe you've never seen victory over bitterness before. Maybe you're not convinced by my story, and that's okay. We may not have the same story or the same bitterness, but we do have one thing in common: the same God. The same God who helped Moses lead his people out of captivity will help you escape the prison of your bitterness. The same God who helped David defeat Goliath will help you slay your giant. And with the help of that God, you can deal with your anger and work to resolve it much earlier than I did. You can identify that your anger has become bitterness. You can expose it to yourself and then to the people who can help you. And you can put measures in place to stop that root from growing again. You can decide today that you'll no longer allow this to be rooted inside you. You can kill bitterness. And you can take the first step right now by making room for God to move in power in your life.
Through generations, I know that you will keep your covenant. like David. You made a shepherd boy courageous. I may not face Goliath, but I've got my own giants. Oh God, my God, I need you. Oh God, my God, I need you now. And how I need you now. Oh rock of ages, I'm standing on your faithfulness. Your faithfulness. On your faithfulness.
You heard your children, you hear your children. You are the same God, you are the same God. You answered prayers back, and you will answer. You are the same God, you are the same God.
You were provider then, you are providing now. You are the same God, you are the same God. You moved in power then, God move in power now. You are the same God, you are the same God. You were a healer then, you are a healer now. You are the same God, you are the same God. You were a savior then, you are a savior now. You are the same God, you are the same. Oh God, my God, I need you. Oh God, my God, I need you now. And how I need you now. Oh rock of ages, I'm standing on your faithfulness. On your faithfulness. And oh God, my God, I need you. Oh God, my God, I need you now. And how I need you now. Rock of ages, I'm standing on your faithfulness. On your
The same God who helped Moses lead his people out of captivity can help you escape the prison of bitterness. If this is an area of struggle for you, even if it seems impossible, there is victory waiting for you. You just have to take that first step. Maybe for you, that first step looks like some additional support. If so, we are here to listen and to pray with you. You can request prayer in the chat right now, or you can follow the link provided and request to meet with one of our pastors. I want to thank you for being here today, and I want to encourage you to invite a friend to watch with you and join us again next week as we kick off our Easter series, Come Alive.